You open that gate for them, but not for me. Explain how that's fair, Mark.
Because they're on the list, Claire. You're not. The rules aren't mine. They're the board's.
I live here, my kids live here, and you think a sign-in sheet gives you the right to lock me out?
You owe the community since 1950. That's what she said, like it was the most ordinary statement in the world. I had just finished sanding the handrails when she handed me a bill large enough to buy a used car. Supposedly, it was for legacy fees tied to the house. I bought a mansion, not a time capsule. Yet somehow, every letter, every official-looking document pulled me further into something that reeked of corruption, wrapped neatly in tradition and polished with false authority. It wasn't just wrong. It felt personal. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if your HOA pulled this stunt on you? The morning sun glints off the freshly restored brass fixtures on my lakefront porch as I brush on the final coat of marine varnish. 6 months of weekends, countless salvage yard hunts, and more money than I care to total have resurrected this 1920s mansion from a collapsing relic into something that finally deserves its view of the lake. The cedar shingles shine with new stain, and the wraparound porch now mirrors the look it had in those faded photographs I discovered tucked behind loose floorboards. I'm admiring the transformation when the sound of footsteps interrupts the quiet. Elaine Porter, president of the neighborhood board and the local queen of unsolicited involvement, walks toward me with a manila folder clutched to her chest like a badge of authority. Her crisp khakis and spotless polo practically scream HOA enforcer. And that smile of hers, polite, practiced, and just a little too pleased, promises trouble. "Good morning, Evan," she says in that syrupy tone reserved for bad news. "Your restoration work is stunning. Truly captures the property's historic charm." She pauses, glancing around with calculated approval. "Speaking of historic charm," she adds, "I've got some important paperwork regarding your property obligations." The folder lands on my makeshift workbench with a deliberate thud. Inside are pages covered in official letterhead. The word Special Assessment Notice printed in bold across the top. My stomach twists as I read the figure, $27,000. The varnish brush slips from my hand. This says I owe legacy dues dating back to 1950. What does that even mean? Elaine adjusts her glasses with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Community obligations transfer with the deed," she explains. "When you purchased the home, you assumed all association covenants and inherited responsibilities. These stem from the original community group, long before the current HOA was formed." I flip through the pages, hoping for something that makes sense. The legal jargon cites Michigan Nonprofit Corporation Act Section 4550.2101 and references obligations from something called the Prechoa Community Organization. It sounds official, but my instincts scream otherwise. "Hold on," I say, setting the papers down. "Your board was created in 1996. I checked before I bought this place. You can't bill me for debts from 1950 when your group didn't even exist." Her smile doesn't waver, but I catch a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "The law can be complicated, Evan. These obligations pass through legal channels. Everything's properly documented under Michigan statute." The absurdity hits like a slap. What's next? Back pay for World War II Victory Gardens. "This isn't legal," I mutter. Elaine taps the paper with one manicured finger. "I understand your hesitation, but legal obligations don't vanish with time. The community has honored these traditions for decades. Every homeowner is expected to contribute their fair share." While she talks, I've started tidying my workbench, a nervous habit. My hand closes around an old ceramic mug I found yesterday in a kitchen cabinet. The faded blue lettering reads Fish Fry 1950, Voluntary Donations. Beneath it, someone painted a leaping fish, and the words Contribute if able. "Interesting," I say, holding it up. "Found this during renovation. Seems your so-called obligations were voluntary donations." Her composure slips for just a second. She reaches for the mug, but I pull it back. "Old artifacts don't always represent current legal requirements," she insists. "Records evolve to reflect the community's needs." That's when I notice the antique brass dinner bell by the front door, intricately engraved, clearly original to the house. As I turn the mug in my hand, the bell lets out a faint, pure chime, though the air is perfectly still. A chill runs through me. Did you hear that? I ask, glancing at her. Hear what? She replies, her expression blank, but her body edging toward the steps. I really must finish delivering these notices. You have 30 days to pay or arrange a payment plan. The board meets monthly if you'd like to discuss terms. Other properties? I call out. How many people are you pulling into this? All lakefront homes share the same obligations, she answers, already halfway across the lawn. Traditions apply equally to everyone. I trust you'll handle this responsibly. We've always maintained high community standards. I watch her vanish down the tree-lined street, then return to the documents. The language might sound intimidating, but I know enough property law to recognize nonsense. No HOA can demand fees for years before it existed. They can't inherit debts from a defunct organization, and they certainly can't charge homeowners for something that happened decades before they were born. The mug sits on my bench, its cheerful fish design mocking her supposed authority. Voluntary donations and contribute if able hardly sound like binding dues. If this fish fry tradition really dates back to 1950, someone around here must remember the truth. I grab my laptop and dive into Michigan property law. Afternoon sunlight filters through the restored windows as I scroll through statute after statute. Elaine clearly thinks I'm just another clueless homeowner who'll pay whatever bill lands in his mailbox. She's about to learn I can read legal code just fine. Then, the bell chimes again. Soft. Clear. And I'm not even near it. I glance toward the door. No breeze. No movement. Just that eerie ring fading into silence. Old houses have quirks, sure, but self-ringing bells? That's new. As I resume my research, one thought lingers. Elaine mentioned other affected properties. All the lakefront homes. If she's trying to collect from everyone, this isn't just a scam, it's organized fraud. When I set the mug on the coffee table, the bell rings once more. The air is still as glass. 3 days later, the phone starts ringing. First, a neighbor 2 houses down, voice tight with panic. Evan, did you get a $27,000 bill from the HOA for something called legacy dues? Then another call, the man across the street. Then the elderly couple at the corner. Then the family next door. 7 lakefront homes. Same notice. Same amount. Same ridiculous claim of debt reaching back to 1950. Elaine hasn't singled me out. She's blanketed the entire waterfront with her scam. I grab my HOA law booklet and check my mailbox. Another envelope waits inside, stamped final notice in angry red letters. My 30-day grace period has magically shrunk to 15, and failure to pay now means collections and property liens. If it weren't so serious, it would almost be funny. Across 7 families, that adds up to nearly $200,000 for imaginary debts.
My research confirms it. Under Michigan compiled laws 559.184, HOA fees must fund current community expenses. They can't demand retroactive payments for periods before their creation, nor can they assume debts from non-existent groups. Elaine's entire legacy fee operation blatantly violates state law. Every single procedural requirement, ignored. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrives. Walter Harlan, everyone calls him Walt, shuffles up my porch, a manila envelope tucked under his arm and irritation etched into every line of his face. I know him by reputation, the elderly gentleman in the original stone cottage at the end of the street, rumored to have lived here since the Eisenhower years. "You're the guy dealing with Elaine's so-called legacy nonsense," he says, his gravelly voice carrying both age and anger. "Thought you might like to see the real history instead of her legal fiction." Walt tears open the envelope and pulls out a faded invitation printed on creamy cardstock. The elegant script reads Annual Fish Fry, 1950s, with a hand-drawn leaping fish. Beneath, smaller text notes, suggested donation, pay what you can. All neighbors welcome. Walt explains, I discovered this in my attic yesterday. 1952, I think. My late wife kept everything from our early days here. He taps the invitation. Notice anything different from Elaine's version? Suggested donation and pay what you can hardly sound like compulsory fees. Lily Carter steps up from the sidewalk while we talk. She's likely in her early 30s, fit, walking with confidence. I recognize her from neighborhood runs, though we've never spoken. Mind if I join? She asks, nodding toward Walt's invitation. I overheard your discussion about legacy fees. I used to work for the HOA before Elaine took over. Walt and I exchange glances. This just keeps getting more interesting. Work for them? How? I ask. Lily perches on the porch railing, her expression serious. Secretary, 2012 to 2015. I quit when Elaine began enforcing questionable financial practices. These legacy charges break every procedural rule I know. Special assessments require a community vote, full budget justification, and at least 90 days notice. She pulls out her phone, displaying Michigan HOA regulations. Section 559.186 requires a majority membership vote for assessments over $5,000. Did anyone receive ballots, meeting notices, or financial disclosures? None of us had. Just Elaine's assessment demands. No meetings, no budget reports, no democratic process, she simply declared legacy dues and demanded payment. Walt holds up the 1952 fish fry invitation again. At that moment, the dinner bell chimes twice, clear and melodic, even though there's no wind. We all hear it. That's been happening since I found the ceramic mug, I explain, nodding toward the bell. Seems to ring when people talk about the real fish fry history versus Elaine's version. Lily raises an eyebrow but focuses on the facts. How many families received these charges? 7, so far. All lakefront properties. Same amounts, same legal wording, same threats of collections. Walt studies the invitation. Probably every house with lake access. But looking at this old guest list, he squints at the faded handwriting on the back. 1952 shows only 4 families attended, the Hendersons, the Millers, the Kowalskis, and us. Most current houses weren't built until the 70s or 80s. Mental math clicks. So Elaine's collecting legacy debt from 23 families for events that involved only 4 households, Lily adds grimly. And it gets better, she continues. Her assessment cites authority under the Michigan Nonprofit Corporation Act, but HOA incorporation records show establishment in 1996, 46 years after these supposed inherited obligations began. Walt chuckles. The real kicker, old Mrs. Henderson kept meticulous records. Every fish fry, every donation, every expense, all logged in ledger books. Her granddaughter donated everything to the Historical Society when she passed. Actual documentation exists. Walt's eyes gleam. Every penny accounted for. Highest annual collection was $96 in 1968 during that early heatwave when everyone showed up. Hardly supports modern legacy debt calculations. As afternoon shadows stretch, the 3 of us review Walt's historical records and Lily's regulatory knowledge. It becomes glaringly obvious, Elaine fabricated legal authority, invented inherited obligations, and bypassed every homeowner protection against financial abuse. Yet she made a critical error. By targeting multiple families simultaneously, she created the potential for coordinated resistance. 7 households facing identical fraudulent demands represent substantial collective resources and motivation. What's our next move? I ask. Walt readies to leave. Lily checks her phone. I still have contacts at the county assessor and HOA oversight office. I'll call them to see what official channels exist for challenging these charges. Meanwhile, I'll reach out to other original residents, Walt adds. Few people are left who remember the true history. Time they hear about Elaine's creative version. 7 families now owe legacy debts. Yet when counting houses from Walt's old invitation, only 4 existed in 1950. 5 days later, the first escalation arrives in my mailbox, a bright yellow flyer reading Neighborhood Standards Alert in bold, followed by 7 addresses under properties with defaulting legacy fees. My address tops the list like a badge of shame. Below, Elaine's note states, the following residents have failed to honor long-standing local traditions and financial obligations dating back to 1950. Until these matters are resolved, their participation in neighborhood activities will be suspended. I stare at the flyer, burning with anger. She's trying to ostracize people for refusing to pay a fabricated debt. Like being banned for not buying imaginary unicorns. The social pressure campaign escalates immediately. That afternoon, I head to the neighborhood pool for my usual laps. The gated facility requires an HOA key card. I've used it for 6 months without issue. The young pool attendant intercepts me at the gate, clearly uneasy. Sorry, Mr. Miles, you're not in good standing with dues. I can't let you in until it's resolved. Not in good standing? My voice cracks despite rising irritation. I pay my monthly dues automatically. Check your records. The attendant avoids eye contact. Legacy dues, sir. Mrs. Porter left instructions. No point arguing. He's following orders, likely scared of losing his summer job. Yet the exclusion stings far more than expected. Swimming daily laps had become my peaceful ritual. Elaine's social warfare aims to make normal life unbearable so people pay to regain comfort. 3 days later, another blow, a neighbor from 2 houses down stops by, looking guilty. Evan, I feel terrible about this. She wrings her hands. The annual neighborhood barbecue is next weekend, and Elaine specifically excluded the 7 families with outstanding legacy assessments. She claims it enforces neighborhood standards. I process this in disbelief, because I won't pay $27,000 in imaginary 1950 debt. I'm banned from the cookout. Some neighbors fear social backlash if they support the wrong side. The harassment continues throughout the week. Walt loses dock privileges despite living here since 1952 and personally building much of the structure. An elderly corner couple is disinvited from the wine club. Another neighbor's trash pickup is mysteriously stopped due to account irregularities. Elaine's tactics are meant to make resistance more costly than compliance. Yet her plan backfires. Lily Carter becomes a one-woman resistance network, visiting excluded families to coordinate our fight. Her HOA experience lends credibility. Elaine's overplaying her hand, Lily notes during an impromptu strategy session on my porch. Cutting off services like trash pickup creates liability. Denying pool access to current dues payers breaches agreements. Walt arrives with a folder of historical documents, barely containing his indignation. 40 years of records gone because I won't pay fake fish fry debt. She's lost her mind, I observe. She thought making life uncomfortable would force compliance. She miscalculated. Lily points out, instead of isolating families, Elaine united all 7 against common harassment. Walt spreads black and white photos from the 50s and 60s across my coffee table, lakefront gatherings, picnic tables, children playing, adults grilling. A genuinely warm community, nothing like Elaine's drama. Real neighborhood, Walt says softly. People helping each other, sharing what they had, celebrating together. No payments required, no social hierarchies, no punishment. The dinner bell chimes once, resonant and clear. Its mysterious response to historical truth versus administrative fiction has become familiar. That evening, 3 neighbors from outside the excluded 7 visit separately, each expressing quiet support. Fear keeps them from openly opposing Elaine, yet they refuse to buy her legacy debt story. A retired couple leaves me a note. This legacy assessment violates everything my late husband taught me about HOA law. Stay strong. Elaine's support relies on fear and coercion, not belief in her claims. But her campaign contains a fatal flaw. By listing addresses and amounts, she documents coordinated harassment. Denying services creates liability. Threatening social consequences for supporting targeted families crosses lines recognized even by compliant neighbors. The isolation intended to divide us strengthens resistance instead. Standing on my porch, watching the sunset glint on the lake, I count houses. The barbecue invitation lists 23 feuding families. Yet cross-referencing Walt's photos reveals most didn't exist in 1950. Elaine's legacy debt scheme is mathematically impossible. Over the following days, my kitchen table becomes mission control, legal records, historical photographs, Michigan HOA statutes, witness statements sprawled everywhere. If Elaine wants to play games with fake debt, I am ready with documented facts and proper legal procedures. Michigan's Attorney General publishes clear HOA complaint guidelines. Section 559.192 demands records for special assessment challenges. Elaine's scheme fails every requirement. Tuesday morning, Walt arrives with a cardboard box, a satisfied gleam in his eye. Found 3 more original residents willing to testify about the real fish fry history. Plus records you'll appreciate. He carefully opens the box, photograph albums, handwritten guest lists, expense ledgers from the early 50s. Look at this, Walt says, opening a leather-bound ledger from 1954. Total fish fry expenses, $32. Total donations collected, $47. Surplus $15 donated to County Food Bank. He flips pages showing consistent entries. Highest collection $96, lowest $18 during the 1975 recession. The evidence starkly contradicts Elaine's narrative. I snap photos as Walt explains the records. Mrs. Henderson documented everything: guest lists, receipts, donation totals, thank you notes from families who couldn't contribute but still attended. The fish fry was an inclusive neighborhood tradition, welcoming all regardless of financial contribution, sometimes more attendees than donors, proving donations were voluntary. Here's the kicker: Walt keeps producing a worn tin labeled neighbor's jar, voluntary donations only. Inside, slips of paper span from 1950 to 1978, each folded neatly and specifying that contributions were entirely voluntary. The language emphasizes neighborhood camaraderie, with phrases like "grateful for the fellowship of our neighbors" and "thank you for including our family regardless of financial means." These physical records directly contradict Elaine's claims that fees were mandatory. After lunch, Lily joins us, carrying her own collection of documents and 3 additional witness statements. Her meticulous approach to gathering evidence clearly shows her professional legal experience. The county assessor confirms that the HOA was officially incorporated on October 15, 1996, noting that no predecessor organizations had filed incorporation documents or maintained legal authority. Elaine's assertions about inherited obligations from prior neighborhood groups lack any legal backing. Lily spreads copies of official paperwork across the table. Michigan's Nonprofit Corporation Act specifies exact procedures for special fees exceeding $5,000, including a neighborhood vote, detailed budget justification, 90-day advance notice, and an appeals process. Elaine bypassed every step. As the afternoon progresses, our evidence pile grows: historical proof that fish fry donations were voluntary, legal records showing HOA formation decades after the alleged obligations began, and patterns suggesting a systematic violation of homeowner protections. Walt adds insight from his 70 years of living in the neighborhood. What frustrates me most is that Elaine is eroding the real spirit of the community to chase a phantom neighborhood debt. Neighbors who once greeted one another freely now hesitate if someone is on Elaine's delinquent list. Just as we discuss neighborhood history versus administrative corruption, the dinner bell chimes, a complex sequence rather than a single tone, almost as if responding to our collective investigation. That's unusual, Lily notes, glancing at the bell. It's like it's reacting to all of us working together rather than individual discoveries. By evening, our records are massive: 3 original residents ready to testify about voluntary fish fry traditions, financial ledgers proving modest contributions inconsistent with current legacy debt claims, legal proof showing procedural violations in fee notification, and evidence that most lakefront properties didn't exist during the periods of alleged obligations. As we organize our materials for filing an official complaint, Lily produces one final document that changes everything: a manila folder labeled confidential, HOA board use only, containing financial records from her time as HOA secretary. "I kept copies when I quit," she says quietly. Even back then, something felt wrong about Elaine's financial management. I wanted protection in case questions arose later. She opens the folder to reveal budget discrepancies, unexplained expenses, and payment authorizations bypassing standard approval procedures. These irregularities date back to Elaine's first year as president. Lily's voice tight with restrained anger. She's been testing limits for years, seeing how far she could manipulate things. Examining the files, I recognize a clear pattern: unauthorized payments, missing records, expense categories that sound official but lack supporting detail. The legacy assessment scheme is part of a broader financial manipulation. Why didn't you report this earlier? Walt asks. I tried, Lily replies, her expression hardening. I filed complaints with the board, raised concerns at meetings, recorded everything. But Elaine controlled elections and meeting agendas. I quit to preserve proof and maintain legal protection, knowing her schemes would eventually go too far. She taps the financial files. The legacy fees violated every procedural requirement. This finally provides grounds for official intervention. As darkness falls over the lake, we finalize our legal strategy. Walt's historical records refute legacy debt claims. My research confirms procedural violations. But when Lily opens her old HOA files, one detail makes her pale. The financial irregularities run deeper than any of us anticipated, transforming our civil dispute into a potential criminal investigation. The next morning, the unexpected happens. While I review legal documents at my kitchen table, urgent pounding rattles the front door. Through the window, I spot Elaine standing beside a large man in a uniform, carrying a clipboard and measuring tape. Inspector Bradley with the County Compliance Office, the man announces as I open the door. He claims to investigate potential violations regarding heritage obligations. Elaine hovers behind him, eyes gleaming. Something immediately feels wrong. The uniform is generic, the badge vague, the clipboard suspiciously blank. Legitimate county inspectors do not make surprise visits over HOA disputes. I politely request credentials. Bradley hesitates and produces a laminated card, lacking official seals, photo, or ID numbers. It looks homemade. Elaine steps forward aggressively, insisting Bradley has full authority. I reply calmly, pulling out my phone, let's verify his employment and authority with the county assessor's office. Bradley panics, claiming he has documents in his vehicle. I suggest walking to review them. His documents, unsurprisingly, are incomplete. Neighbors begin gathering. Walt, the Hendersons, and Mike step forward, drawn by the confrontation. Walt's authoritative voice cuts through. Official county business requires proper notification and scheduling. Bradley shifts uncomfortably under scrutiny. Mike adds, emergency intervention for civil HOA disputes? That's not how county government works. I spent 20 years in municipal administration. At that moment, Lily steps forward. Inspector Bradley? Isn't that the name Robert Fletcher, Elaine's brother-in-law from Grand Rapids? Bradley freezes. Elaine's face shifts through shock, anger, and desperate calculation as her intimidation scheme collapses publicly. Robert helped Elaine with previous schemes, Lily explains. He's not a county inspector. He's an unemployed construction worker with a costume habit. Neighbors react with a mix of shock and validation, realizing the fraudulent nature of Elaine's tactics. Elaine protests, claiming legitimacy, but Walt responds with sarcasm, I've lived here since Eisenhower. That costume wouldn't fool a third grader. Mike adds, this is a felony. Impersonating officials to intimidate homeowners is criminal under Michigan law. Bradley abandons the charade, muttering excuses. I clarify, legitimate HOA assessments don't require fake inspectors or intimidation. After the crowd disperses, 3 families approach to offer support and apologize for their prior hesitation. Elaine's failed inspector gambit exposes her deception, alienating potential allies. Lily provides additional context, confirming her suspicions. Tuesday evening, the community center buzzes with nervous energy. I invoke the Michigan Homeowner Bill of Rights, Section 559.206, which guarantees formal hearings for disputed fees over $5,000. 28 residents attend, including all families targeted by legacy fees. Elaine sits at the head table with Mark Benson, the nervous HOA treasurer, and 2 board members. The hearing addresses disputed legacy obligations dating back to 1950. Elaine opens with a rehearsed statement, claiming resistance is frivolous and inherited obligations are valid under Michigan law. I rise, presenting boxes of records collected over 2 weeks. I highlight serious legal violations in both the claims and collection procedures. The Michigan statute requires HOA incorporation before imposing binding fees. Our HOA incorporated on October 15, 1996. Legacy obligations allegedly date to 1950, 46 years before legal authority existed. HOAs cannot inherit debts from unincorporated predecessor organizations. I distribute copies of state regulations. Elaine interrupts, neighborhood traditions don't need incorporation, property ownership carries responsibility for long-standing commitments. I counter, voluntary traditions cannot become mandatory fees without legal procedures. Walt presents historical evidence, donations were voluntary. Families brought food or helped, never money. No mandatory fees or inherited obligations existed. He spreads photos and ledgers showing small annual contributions, averaging $50 to $60. Neighbors murmur as images depict genuine community spirit, entirely at odds with Elaine's schemes. Lily addresses procedural violations. Michigan law requires a neighborhood vote, detailed budget justification, 90-day notice, and an appeals process. Legacy fees bypassed every requirement. The most damaging testimony comes from Mark Benson. Under questioning, he admits the legacy fee funds lack transparency, with $43,000 spent on board enhancement expenses, professional development, administrative overhead, and other questionable items, collected from fraudulent fees. The audience is stunned. I summarize, legacy fees exceed HOA authority, collection procedures violated required approvals, fund expenditures lack accountability, and underlying claims have no legal foundation. These fees represent abuse of board power and violate homeowner protections. Elaine's closing remarks are futile. Mark's disclosure of $43,000 in board expenses creates unavoidable legal liability. Neighbors leave, offering support and apologies. Wednesday morning, a local investigative reporter from the Lakeside Tribune calls, following up on tips about HOA financial irregularities. The story is about to reach a wider audience. Mr. Miles, I've received information about questionable legacy fees being charged to Lakefront homeowners. Would you be open to sharing your experience for a potential news report? I nearly dropped the phone. How did this come to your attention? An anonymous tip came through our fraud hotline last night. The caller described fake inspector visits, financial irregularities, and systematic harassment of homeowners. If true, it could be a story of major public interest. Within 2 hours, a reporter shows up at my house, armed with a digital recorder and legal pad. She appears to be in her mid-30s, dressed professionally, exuding the intense focus of someone who investigates corruption for a living. Her questions reflect careful preparation and legal knowledge. Walk me through the legacy fee process from the beginning, she says as I settle into my porch chair. Start with your first contact and include all the records you've kept. I provide a detailed timeline, from Elaine's initial fee notice to the fake inspector visit and the financial disclosures during the formal hearing. She photographs each document, takes meticulous notes, and asks pointed questions about potential legal violations and the broader impact on the neighborhood. $43,000 in board expenses for a 30-family HOA? She looks up from her notes, eyebrows raised. That's extraordinary, even for legitimate community spending. Mid-afternoon, Walt joins us with additional historical context and witness statements. The reporter interviews him extensively about the original fish fry traditions, documenting the voluntary nature of participation and modest financial scope. Mrs. Henderson maintained precise records, Walt explains, showing the donation ledgers to the reporter. $96 was the highest amount collected in a year. The notion that voluntary potluck contributions create inherited debt obligations is completely fabricated. The reporter's investigation quickly broadens as she contacts other affected families and reviews public records. By evening, she has spoken with 6 of the 7 households targeted by legacy fees, plus 3 additional neighbors who witnessed the fake inspector incident. This is developing into a much larger story than a few isolated HOA disputes, she tells me during a follow-up call. I'm seeing a pattern of questionable financial practices. Her background check on Elaine Porter uncovers a troubling history, previous HOA positions in 2 other Michigan neighborhoods, both ending amid serious financial irregularities. Bloomfield Hills, 2010 to 2013, Elaine was treasurer for a 50-family HOA. Residents complained about unauthorized special fees for landscaping projects. Royal Oak, 2014 to 2016, HOA president. Similar pattern, special fees for neighborhood improvements with vague budget explanations. Residents organized a recall election, but Elaine moved away before it concluded. I process this with growing alarm. So, our legacy fee scheme is her 3rd documented attempt at systematic financial manipulation. 3rd that I've identified so far, the reporter corrects. Her coverage draws the attention of the Michigan Attorney General's office. By Thursday afternoon, she receives confirmation that state officials have opened a preliminary inquiry into HOA financial abuse based on her reporting. The Consumer Protection Division handles HOA fraud cases. Your formal complaint, combined with media coverage, creates pressure for official action, the reporter explains. Walt adds the report's strongest evidence by locating 3 additional original residents willing to testify about the authentic fish fry history, an elderly attendee from early events, another original resident, and a longtime neighbor who remembers gatherings from the 1950s through the 1970s. All confirm voluntary donations and neighborly cooperation, no mandatory payments or inherited obligations. The elderly resident gives her testimony during the reporter's interview. That weekend brings the reporter's most shocking discovery. While reviewing public records for HOA incorporation and finances, she uncovers evidence that Elaine had been planning to target our neighborhood for over 3 years. Property records show Elaine purchased her home in 2021. County records reveal she had been researching lakefront property values and HOA governance structures since 2019. She moved here specifically to implement legacy fee schemes. Evidence suggests deliberate selection of communities based on property values, weak board oversight, and older residents less likely to challenge authority. Lakefront properties became her ideal target. Each new revelation makes Elaine's scheme seem more calculated and sinister. The reporter's work creates momentum far beyond what local resistance could achieve alone. With professional journalistic validation and state involvement, what started as a civil dispute transforms into a criminal fraud investigation with statewide ramifications. Sunday evening, the reporter calls with final findings. Elaine used the same legacy fee methods in her prior communities, identical legal language, same voluntary traditions presented as mandatory, and the same intimidation tactics when residents resisted. This is a systematic approach applied across multiple jurisdictions. How many communities total? I ask, unease growing. 3 confirmed, possibly more. Conservative estimates suggest she tried to collect over $500,000 through these legacy fee schemes. Our community's organized opposition marks the first time her system has faced resistance and media scrutiny. As the reporter prepares her story for publication, this case expands beyond our lakefront neighborhood. What began as a local HOA dispute now exposes criminal practices affecting communities across Michigan. Her thorough reporting validates everything we suspected about Elaine's calculated financial manipulation. Monday morning, the newspaper headline reads, "Legacy fee fraud targets lakefront neighborhoods. Sarah Chen's in-depth investigation exposes Elaine Porter's systematic scheme." The article details fraudulent fees, fake inspector intimidation, financial irregularities, and evidence of similar crimes across 3 Michigan communities. By noon, the situation escalates. The Michigan Attorney General's office issues cease and desist orders preventing further legacy fee collection. The Consumer Protection Division opens a formal criminal inquiry into interstate fraud allegations. Our neighborhood's resistance sparks a statewide response to HOA financial abuse. Tuesday morning, Mark Benson appears at my door, haggard and panicked. "Evan, I need to return the legacy fee payments immediately," he says, voice trembling. Attorney General officials are demanding full financial records, and the unauthorized board expenditures cannot be justified under legal scrutiny. "How much total did you collect?" I ask. $47,000 from 3 families who paid before resistance organized, plus $43,000 in board expenses. That money must be returned with interest to avoid criminal charges. Mark's confession reveals $90,000 was extracted through fraudulent legacy fees and spent on unauthorized board enhancements, a serious crime. His cooperation indicates desperation to avoid prosecution as Elaine's accomplice. What exactly were these board enhancements? I ask, though his guilty expression already answers. Professional development conferences in Miami and Las Vegas, leadership seminars, community representation activities. Elaine insisted everything was legitimate, but officials refused to accept those justifications. Wednesday brings a neighborhood meeting to address the inquiry and plan legitimate HOA governance. 31 residents attend, the largest local gathering in years. Relief, determination, and resolve fill the room. Lily Carter speaks authoritatively, based on her record-keeping and legal expertise. Michigan law requires new board elections when criminal allegations involve current leadership. I volunteer as interim secretary. Walt raises his hand from the back. A motion to remove Elaine Porter from all HOA positions immediately and permanently is proposed. Her criminal charges create liability for the entire neighborhood. The motion passes unanimously. Nobody speaks in her defense. Thursday afternoon, the police arrive at Elaine's house with search warrants for consumer fraud, criminal conspiracy, and interstate racketeering. Neighbors watch as officers remove boxes of documents, computers, and financial records detailing her multi-neighborhood legacy fee schemes. Elaine, pale and handcuffed, walks to the cruiser, bringing a sense of closure after weeks of harassment. Friday reveals the most remarkable discovery. During the search, officers locate the original 1950 fish fry organizing records hidden inside the antique dinner bell Elaine stole from Walt's cottage. The bell contains handwritten charters confirming voluntary neighborhood support, no mandatory contributions, no inheritance obligations, directly contradicting Elaine's claims. Walt marvels at the recovered documents. The stolen bell was used to hide evidence disproving her entire scheme. Its responsive chimes weren't supernatural but mechanically triggered by vibrations near the hidden records. The truth had been there all along. 2 weeks later, legal resolutions vindicate the targeted families. The Michigan Attorney General confirms that legacy fees violated multiple state laws. Unauthorized board expenses constitute criminal embezzlement, and intimidation tactics crossed into criminal conspiracy. Elaine faces charges in 3 counties for consumer fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and theft by conversion. Total damages exceed $500,000 across all communities. Mark's cooperation results in reduced charges but mandatory restitution of all collected legacy fees plus interest. The neighborhood begins healing with a legitimate fish fry, organized by Walt, drawing on decades of historical tradition. Voluntary donations total $84, contributed to the county food bank. No mandatory fees, no inherited obligations, just genuine community spirit. The restored dinner bell rings melodically, signaling a return to authentic neighborly joy. Standing by the lake at sunset, I hang the new fish fry sign. Since 1950, voluntary again in 2024. The bell chimes softly but proudly. For the first time, it feels like peace, not proof. Perhaps the real lesson is that truth doesn't shout, it waits, steady, until someone finally listens.